Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of SupplyChainBrain, and I want to welcome you to this presentation on implementing automation in a brownfield environment, presented by Tecsys. Quick reminder before we get started, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So, are you tackling the task of integrating automation into your existing warehouse? Today, we're sharing insights and guidance on how to successfully address this challenge. In particular, we'll be talking about the advantages and pitfalls of installing automation in a brownfield warehouse, that is, a distribution facility located on land that's been used for previous operations. Our experts from Locus Robotics, Bricz and Tecsys will address the current state of automation and the best options for brownfield warehouses. It's a great opportunity to optimize your warehouse operations and drive efficiency through automation. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Steve Branch is Vice President Sales Engineering with Locus Robotics. Steve brings over 30 years of software and technology experience from both established and high-growth companies. He started his material handling career at Kiva Systems, where he helped bring mobile robots into the warehouse mainstream. He's also led the design of high-capacity fulfillment centers. Chad Jolly is Senior Manager with Bricz, responsible for the growth of the company's robotics practice. He has a diverse background in operations, projects and program management, industrial engineering, facility design, WMS implementations, automation solution design, and selection within the distribution and fulfillment sector of the supply chain. And V. Sridayakumar is product manager with Tecsys. V has more than a decade of experience in the supply chain sector. Beginning his career in manufacturing operations, he spent 8 years in leadership roles across multiple links of the supply chain. Welcome to all of you. Great to have you here. Let's get right into the panel portion of our discussion here. I'm going to start off with posing a question to Chad. Chad, we got MODEX 2024 is now behind us, so a lot of viewers are probably now thinking very strongly about automating their warehouses. But unless you have the luxury of a greenfield project, implementing automation obviously can be disruptive to an operation. So my first question to you, Chad, is how do you minimize disruption when putting automation into a brownfield warehouse?
Yeah, great question. Yes, so obviously MODEX is very overwhelming with so many different solutions. And I think it boils down to two main things: understanding and preparation. Step one is choosing the right solution. So knowing what you're looking to accomplish is key to drive your decision making. And then knowing the scalability of a solution based on growth projections or supporting peak season volume. Those are two key factors that you want to be looking at, so you're not reevaluating or re-solutioning down the line. And then the level of disruption and the implementation times of each solution type, you need to look at those in depth, because maybe a more disruptive solution that can be implemented quicker would be a better option than longer term implementation that's less disruptive. And then you also want to look at the pros and cons of the more disruptive versus less disruptive solutions. And then step two is being prepared. So preparing your facility by going to the floor and making sure that they're aware of what solution you're looking at and educating them, making sure that they are aware of what this automation solution will do. A lot of times we'll see a lot of resistance because people are under the assumption that automation is going to take their job, when really 9 times out of 10, we're just putting in a more safer solution that's going to help make their job easier, whether it's bringing a pick location to the picker rather than them walking, or reducing traffic with forklifts. And then looking at the vendor capabilities or limitations is key as well, because you want to be able to have the support you need, whether it's 24/7 support or maintenance on call. You want to make sure that these are all options when implementing in a brownfield and minimizing disruption. And then lastly, the WMS is key. You want to make sure that you have the right WMS in place, but also the team to support this. So you can have all the automation in the world, but if you're not configuring your WMS correctly to accommodate the automation solution, it's probably not going to work to the standard that you're looking at, right? And you want to also make sure that you have the capabilities internally to be able to integrate. You want to, if you're looking at one solution or multiple, you're going to have to be able to communicate with them from the WMS to the WES or whatever other system, whether it's a middleware or custom APIs, whatever it is, you need to have those capabilities at hand. And then lastly, the maintenance. Do you have maintenance resources? And then do these vendors offer the training for your maintenance resources to be able to sustain long-term rather than continuously updating your support contracts? So these are all the key areas that I look at when trying to minimize disruption in a brownfield.
Yeah, Jen, just to add to that a little bit, you highlighted the people impact, and I can't downplay that or upplay that enough. The people are going to make or break the success of the project. So planning ahead, planning communications with the floor, and really making sure they understand the impact prior to any automation entering the building is going to be key to the success as well.
So you got hardware, you got software, you have that extra little thing called human beings to take into account. So that's quite a checklist to get us started. Thank you very much for that, Chad. Steve, I want to ask you, again, let's take that brownfield perspective, this idea of introducing, like in the case of Locus, shiny new robots into facilities that are anything but shiny and new. And yet it seems like autonomous mobile robots, or AMRs, they're probably the quickest to implement with at least disruption, I'm assuming. So where exactly do you see, Steve, rapid implementation having a larger weight in the decision-making versus other factors like throughput or storage density?
Yeah, Bob, that's a good question, although I'll be honest with you, we see common themes across all segments. We certainly see it in, especially in healthcare or industrial, a lot of the 3PL supporting retail. But again, these themes are pretty common across all of them. Many organizations are hooked into leases in these buildings, or they have an investment already in infrastructure, whether that's racking or storage infrastructure, and they need to realize that investment as opposed to discarding it and starting from scratch. So most organizations need to address the labor shortage and do it very quickly, whereas a lot of these fixed automation options have a very long lead time, measured sometimes in many, many months, as opposed to, the weeks for an AMR solution such as Locus. The need to maintain flexibility. I mean, we all know that, there's fluctuations in a building, and things in a warehouse change. It's a very dynamic environment, whether that's order volume or order profiles, product characteristics, dimensions, things like that. They change, and you need automation that can flex with that. We also see a desire to support omni-channel fulfillment, using the same set of inventory for both B2B and B2C fulfillment. That's another thing that we see. And of course, we do have to acknowledge storage density. It's still very important, and it's important, especially we see it a lot, not only in North America, but throughout Europe and Asia Pacific. Density is a big issue, and you can use a solution such as Locus to go vertical on a mezzanine or a pick mod, a pick tower, to achieve that density that's so very important. So those are just some of the things that we see.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You talked about the need for change and flexibility. It kind of comes in two forms in a warehouse, doesn't it? On one hand, change and flexibility is built into the very nature of any warehouse that involves peak seasons, and which ones don't. I mean, so you expect that kind of change. You've got to flex up or down with your fleet for that. And then, of course, there's the unexpected change that happens in sudden peaks in consumer demand. Who knows why they happen or what happens? So you've got to be doubly flexible there. Do you not, Steve?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned one thing about the ability to flex. We do offer the opportunity for what we call peak pots or short-term pots to cover those periods when you have peak demand. So you can flex your robots up much like you do people at during peak periods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think executives and warehouses are thinking, well, I'm going to be putting a lot of money into this sort of thing. Am I in danger of putting in a system that's going to be going to lock me in 6 months from now? It doesn't serve my needs anymore. Things have changed, as they very often do in that short time. So you're talking about the kind of flexibility that does not lock a buyer in to a particular configuration, that they can flex with the times. So I think that's a super important point you're making. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, okay. So V, let me ask you, tell us, let's talk more. You brought up software. Let's talk more about that, because adding automation to a warehouse not only affects physical operations, there is also the significant software element that's got to be addressed. So what should we be looking for in a warehouse management system, or WMS, when adding automation to a warehouse?
Yeah, so the first thing is making sure you're selecting a good WMS vendor that's got experience implementing automation before. So that's the first thing. Then you want to make sure the WMS you're selecting is going to be flexible amongst hardware providers. You're not doing kind of one set integration with only one hardware provider. Then when you're ready to grow, they're not there. They're not able to meet your demand and really hook into someone else as well. So you want to make sure they're flexible between hardware providers. Then once you've got that selected and you've got a vendor, you've got to really understand the integration points on both sides, on the WMS side as well as the hardware side, as these could be significantly different between the different types of automation. So really get a clear understanding of the commands that a WMS needs to publish to the hardware provider and the results that they get back, and kind of the business logic that gets triggered with that. And sometimes it's always good to engage a integrator to help with some of these complex automations as well. So you want someone who's got experience working with these complex automations. Then you want to look into what other capabilities does the WMS have to control the hardware? How does the WMS determine what work to send where? So you want to make sure you understand all of those and you can direct work to the automation provider easily through your WMS. And you want to make sure that's easy to configure as well as easy to change as your business evolves.
Chad, maybe you could weigh in here and talk about what it's like to be at the nexus between the physical equipment and the WMS and other types of software, and what are some of the challenges involved in making those things all play nice together?
Yeah, so I mean, just knowing the system and the operation and having system expertise available to you is very key to getting the systems to be talking in a way that is going to be seamless, where everything works as it's intended. So working with automation solution as well as a WMS in particular, that you have that level of expertise behind you is going to be key in order to have any type of implementation work successfully and be able to configure to your operation rather than just to meet requirements.
Mm-hmm. So here's another thing we have to think about: the complexity of an automation engagement in just about any warehouse. We talk about this idea of putting automation in a warehouse, and it sounds like we're just dumping one big system into the whole thing and flipping a switch. Not really how it works. There's so much different automation equipment out there. We can't let those systems compete with each other. They need to collaborate with each other. For example, you might have an automated sortation and retrieval system, ASRS, feeding a conveyor in one section, and then you've got AMRs for manual picks in another section. So, Chad, from a planning perspective, how do you go about designing a multiple type automated warehouse? And for that matter, is that even possible in a brownfield?
Yeah, no, great question. We get this question a lot too while we're doing engagements. And yes, it is very possible. But from a planning perspective, there's a lot that goes into it. And really, you just need to know what your end goal is. That gives you your direction to start with, right? And then from there, you're looking at, okay, what opportunities are we trying to close in on? And then what solutions can basically solution those opportunities and make those more seamless processes or flows. From there, we'll look at the different solutions offered by those vendors that maybe they have a wide array of different solutions where we can accommodate different functional areas where we're trying to automate within the warehouse. And with that, we're reducing complexity when we find these type of vendors or system integrators, because we're working through one source rather than working through 2, 3, or more different sources at the same time. And as we go along with the process and see what solutions can accommodate or accommodate the different fixes that we're looking for and solutioning, we want to see which ones have good synergy and which ones will really accompany one another to be successful. So you don't want to have just a bunch of the same types of robots from different vendors riding around. You want to make sure that you have one that can really complement one another, whether it's an arm to an AMR, to conveyors. You really want to understand the whole process and what you want to, what success look like to you. And then from there, figuring out how to do it is a little bit easier because you already have the vision. So now you're looking at the robotic fleet management systems that are available or that have worked with these solutions before. That way you have less complexity for the users. It might add some complexity on the front end for the integration teams, but long-term, you're going to be set up for success. And then having an effective WES is very critical when you're having multiple different types of automation within the same warehouse. And then, as we mentioned before, well-configured WMSs and being able to configure the WMS to accommodate these different types of automation solutions is very key. And then making sure that we have all the messages in place, configured with the correct touch points. We want to make sure that we have each touch point that's needed, as well as communicating the messages with all the details that are required, as V was mentioning prior. So so definitely possible, but a lot of planning and a lot of work.
Yeah, it's kind of getting into that tangle of acronyms now, are we? Got the WMS. You mentioned WES, Warehouse Execution System. There's this thing called a WCS, Warehouse Control System. There's labor management systems. There's all this stuff. V, I'm wondering, though, let's keep to the planning part of it. Are there any unique challenges around what Chad was just saying that apply to the brownfield warehouse as opposed to a greenfield site when it comes to planning and making all this stuff work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in a brownfield warehouse, you're trying to continue your existing operation most times while you're trying to go live with this new automation. So really, the more complex that project is, the more automation systems you're trying to implement at once, the harder it is going to be for you to continue your current operations at the same time. So again, as Chad said, like planning is going to be key, making sure you've got a good plan and your people understand how to execute the current operation. So you're still satisfying the needs of your customers while also planning for the future and implementing the different automation systems that you need. So you've got to have a really good transition plan there.
Good point. Steve, tell me about how Locust approaches this whole idea of your bots working in collaboration with other pieces of automation in the warehouse. They're not just running around doing their thing. They're having to, again, collaborate and integrate into the entire operation. So how does that work, Steve? And what are some of the challenges that we need to be thinking about in order to make sure that all runs smoothly?
Yeah, we have a very unique perspective, Bob, in that we're both a hardware and a software provider. We actually think of ourselves more as software than hardware. Everybody thinks of Locus and they think of the robot, but there's so much around it, our Locus One platform that controls what they do and that communicates with other solutions. So we need to be able to operate productively, flexibly, and safely in environments alongside of other traditional automation and static equipment. So we have a very strong interoperability philosophy. We realize that there are other pieces in a building. We can't do everything. and we have to interoperate with other solutions. So we play very nicely with both upstream and downstream solutions. Things like box on demand solutions such as a pack size device that can create custom sized boxes. Whether it's something like or downstream solutions like sortation, sorters, put walls, and things like that. So we publish a very simple API that allows other solutions to interact with Locus to send us essentially orders, and then we reply back with status information. And again, it's very simple, and we've had a lot of success with it.
Yeah, it's funny, mentioning Modex. One of the fun things about going to a show like Modex or ProMat is just to go check out all the robots, and you just sort of stand there and you ooh and you ah at these magnificent machines working in front of you. Other than coders, I wonder who has ever oohed and awed in front of a software screen. I don't think it doesn't happen, right? But I love the point that you're bringing, that software is so important to the operation, Steve. That the robots are not this standalone thing that just go off and do what they do. Let's talk more though about WMS, and if we can kind of consider WMS to be the brains of the operation, with the hardware being the brawn, right? How do you see software like WMS evolving going forward in the future as warehouses become more automated?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, WMSs are going to evolve for sure. And I think the way they're going to do that is by getting better at really talking to and really orchestrating across many different automation systems, as well as other integrations like ERPs. So they're going to evolve and start orchestrating some of that work, and really in conjunction with the WES warehouse execution system, they're going to really dictate where work needs to happen. So really similar to how ERPs decide which facility to fulfill an order from, your WMS in the future needs to decide, hey, which piece of automation or which workflow should I send some work to get it done in the most efficient way possible? So part of that is going to be supporting some more thorough integrations in the future as well, kind of both on the software and hardware side. Automation currently does the happy path really well, with only some exception cases being handled today. In the future, both the hardware and software is going to support those edge cases better and really become more efficient at those edge cases as well. So the end goal for a WMS continues to be able to run that dark warehouse. You can turn the lights off, your automation is doing everything. But in the short term, for the next several years, the WMS really needs to be able to coordinate between your robots and your people. So it's got to evolve in such a way that it can coordinate across those really complex functions.
Interesting. So it's long been said that you can't fix, you can't improve what you can't measure. So let's talk metrics. Let's talk KPIs, key performance indicators. Because back to the beginning here, what are the metrics or the KPIs that you need to be looking at that will help drive the decision to automate in the first place? Is it simply a question of labor, or does it go beyond that? Chad?
Yeah, no, great question. So I think a lot of it has to do with labor, but I feel like a lot of people or companies, when they think about labor as a metric, they think about the reduction of headcount. I think it goes a little bit deeper. It's more of the outputs of labor. So outbound compliance, like how much volume you're trying to ship out, directly impacted by labor, order accuracy or DPMO, safety, pallets received, trailers received, order cycle times. None of them are having to do with labor reduction necessarily, but more of the outputs of labor. So when you're looking at like a picking solution like a goods to person, that can directly impact your outbound compliance for volume. But there's also other metrics as well that come into play that are non-labor related, and they could be more operational or corporate drivers. For example, storage density or capacity. How much storage capacity can I gain within the brownfield facility by going to this new solution? And then how long can I stay here without having to move to a greenfield? And then one that we've seen quite a bit popping up over the past, I'd say, 5 years is the reduction of your carbon footprint. A lot of companies have goals for 2030 or whatever year to have a zero carbon emissions or something along those lines. So I think that it really depends on the company's objectives and goals. What they're looking to accomplish is kind of the metrics they'll follow. But the ones that I've mentioned, I'd say, are some of the key ones that we look at while also trying to give clients some direction for where to go.
V, let me ask you about this. This is another term that we're hearing a lot these days, and I'm wondering how it applies to planning, warehouses in general, warehouse design, and brownfield facilities in specifically, and that is the concept of the digital twin, the virtual representation of a physical system that allows you to plan and create a series of what-if scenarios, make all the mistakes you want to make in a virtual world, and then lock in on what the best solution is. How does that fit into what we're talking about today, V?
Yeah, so a digital twin is really, it's a replication of your current operations, but entirely digitally, right? So what that allows you to do is you can kind of test out many different automation systems without going through the effort of actually buying and installing them, right? So you can simulate how different automation systems are going to impact your operation and really see what the end result is going to be. Kind of going back to KPIs a little bit as well, your end result is always around customer satisfaction. The customer of a warehouse is the person receiving the goods that you're shipping. So really, you can simulate what that customer satisfaction is going to look like through that digital twin. You can simulate different operations with different automation system and really see that end result and try to measure that end result or predict it based on the different systems you're choosing or considering.
Somehow I knew you'd have an answer to that because this digital twin is just being talked about so much these days. So Steve, from an automation vendor perspective, how much leeway do you typically have in changing a warehouse layout? Considering AMRs, they don't need as much space as automated storage or traditional automation. So do you try and limit your footprint or optimize fulfillment?
Oh, Bob, that's probably the biggest advantage of AMRs and Locus in general too. We try to make as few changes to the existing environment as possible. Locus has really the best navigation and maneuverability. Our robots are incredibly nimble, and they can operate in very narrow, dense, and chaotic environments. And because of that, we don't have to make changes. For example, we don't have to request that they widen their aisles or, include, add more cut-throughs or, things like that, change any of the physical infrastructure in the building. So in most cases, we do install a dedicated wireless network. But beyond that, there's very little physical infrastructure changes that we make to a facility. We certainly have to install chargers for our robots. And we do set up, what we call induct and drop-off queues, places where the robots, either start or end their missions. But that's a very simple process. And again, it requires very minimal physical changes. Mm-hmm. We bring our wealth of experience with our roots in the 3PL and our deep understanding of the logistics challenges, both automation related and otherwise. And, this kind of coupled with our 300 successful deployments, it positions us proactively to advise our clients on opportunities to enhance their ROI. So, Locus really, we benefit from quarterly, our clients benefit from optimization reviews, and we're really aimed at aligning the solution with the warehouse's evolving needs. Just some of the points.
Let's get back for a moment to we alluded earlier to WCS, warehouse control systems, WES, warehouse execution systems, all being associated as downstream systems that are necessary in a lot of facilities. So V, can you provide us with some clarity as to what these do and how they actually work with the WMS and all these various automation systems?
Oh, that's a big question, and everyone defines it slightly differently on where to draw the lines in between these systems. So I'll explain it kind of how we view it here at Tecsys and how I make sense of it in my head. So first off, the WCS, let's start there. So that stands for a warehouse control system, and it does exactly that. It's the control layer that controls that physical automation on the floor. It could be at the PLC level, or with complex, like smarter automation, it could just be sending the commands to the automation system that's then controlling the physical automation. So the WCS is communicating with the WMS to really understand the work that needs to be done. So it's getting the commands from the WMS system. Then it's controlling the automation to do the work. And as the work is happening, it's sending those results back to the WMS. So the WMS continues to stay your system of record for all of your transactions, but the WCS is really controlling that automation layer. And for WMSs, they need to be quick to talk to hardware. So as more and more technology continues to go into the cloud, you'll see that WCS providers continue to offer on-prem services. And that's just for that quick communication with the robots and back. Your WES, on the other hand, so your warehouse execution system, is on the opposite end, and it's really orchestrating things at a much higher level. So your WES is looking at all of the work that needs to get done and deciding on the best way to get it done. So, for example, if you've got two ways to do the same jobs, or you've got limited resources, your WES is really acting as that brain and trying to make those optimal decisions to get that work done, being the most efficient in your warehouse to still meet the needs of your customers. So kind of summarizing on those three, your WES is kind of sitting at the very top, and it's orchestrating within the WMS all the work that needs to get done. It's telling the WMS which commands to send where. Your WMS is then generating those commands and tasks and making them available to resources to get the work done. Your resources might be people, or it could be automation. So when those resources are robots, that's when your WCS comes into the picture, and now it's communicating back and forth with that robot back to your WMS. So your WMS is kind of right in the middle, working through everything, and it's your system of record, and your WES is the brain, and your WCS is the brawn.
Not forgetting people, what about this idea of an LMS, a labor management system? Is that incorporated within a WMS, or is that something sitting out there, another separate system, or where does that fit in?
So an LMS, sometimes it's incorporated within a WMS, and sometimes it's another system. But oftentimes, it needs to work really well with your WES, so your warehouse execution system. So an LMS should be able to predict how long something's going to take to get done with the labor involved, so that your WES can understand that and really make predictions on how things are going to get done and be able to plan the work that needs to get done. So an LMS sometimes is integrated, sometimes it's sitting aside, but it's often a key piece of the whole puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I'm curious, as we go forward, one of the reasons I think this conversation is so timely right now is because there is so much conversion going on of brownfield sites. So we're seeing so many different types of warehouses pop up, from multi-million square feet facilities to smaller, more regionally based or locally based, or even micro-fulfillment centers. So can we assume that going forward, brownfield is going to be a concept that warehouse operators are going to want to embrace more? Number one, there won't be as much greenfield availability. Number two, there'll be just some converting from a store to a dark store, from a small one to to large to small. Are we going to be talking about brownfield? Is this going to be a bigger issue going forward?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. There are so many warehouses in the world today, and again, a lot of organizations are hooked into leases, and they've made significant investments in what they've put into that building, whether it's hardware and or software. So yeah, the trend's going to continue. There's a lot of opportunity out there to add automation to what are currently very manual operations.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Chad? Could you weigh in on that, just in terms of the greater variety of facilities out there and the need for more brownfield conversions as a result?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it also boils down to the evolution of the automation solutions available. Like an ASRS used to be a heavily disruptive solution. increasing storage capacity. But now there's a lot of ASRS systems that are available that are a lot more scalable, a lot quicker deployment times, a lot less disruptive. So as we keep improving the technologies, brownfields are going to be able to stay brownfields rather than moving into greenfields to accommodate this growth, just because the technology is growing as the companies are growing in volume and revenue as well.
Mm-hmm. V, you were talking. I heard the word dark store come into your conversation a little while ago, and yet at the same time we're hearing that there's still going to be people in the mix going forward. What is it going to be going forward in these various facilities? Will there be dark warehouses with no people in them at all? How do we prepare for that? How do we design? How do we make decisions, even in a brownfield or a greenfield operation, as to whether we even need people?
Yeah, and I think the short answer for most people right now is going to be you're going to continue to need people, right? To really have a dark warehouse, you need a much more simple operation where, it's either pallet in, pallet out, or predictable volumes that you can easily move with automation. And most businesses are a lot more complex than that. So with that complexity comes that need for people, and people have these amazing brains that can make these decisions really quickly that we're teaching automation how to do, but automation's still not as powerful as that human brain. So you are still going to need those people in the short term. And by short term, I'm talking, 10, 15 years at a minimum, where it's going to be the blend of people and automation together until you can get to that dark warehouse in the future. Right now, you can do a dark warehouse for simple operations, but the more complexity that you add, you definitely need people.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I want to ask you to clarify for me, V, you had mentioned on-prem types of software, and of course, a lot of this other stuff's in the cloud. But what we're hearing now is the value and proliferation of certain edge computing solutions too. So could you help kind of separate out for those, which is which and what works best in those various configurations?
Yeah, I mean, from an on-prem perspective, anything where you're controlling hardware in a warehouse floor, you really want to have an on-prem solution, right? You don't want your conveyor pinging the cloud, waiting for a response back to know when to divert a case. That's happening in milliseconds, and you've got to be able to communicate that quickly when you're controlling that automation. Kind of everything else, though, can move to the cloud now. Cloud technologies have advanced and are much faster than they've ever been before, and they're going to continue to get advanced. So outside of really that WCS PLC control level controls that you've got, everything else you should move to the cloud, or that's the way of the future right now. Along with security as well. People are always afraid of security concerns in the cloud, but the security technology is constantly improving, and it's top of mind for all software providers to make sure, security is not even a question.
And speaking of the future, Steve, how do you think your Locus robots are going to look in 5-10 years from now in terms of their capabilities? And how will that ease the transition to automation in a brownfield situation?
Yeah, I think, the solution that we have today has utility going long into the future. But another advantage of our business model, our robots as a service, is that you always get the benefit of our continuous improvement. We're always coming out with whether it's new hardware or, enhancements to our software. And every client can take advantage of those if they want to.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for those insights. I'd like to move into the audience portion of our Q&A at this point. And even as we're answering some of the audience questions that have already come in, audience members are encouraged to continue to submit your questions while we're answering these, and we'll get to as many as we can, time permitting. This particular audience question, I believe, goes to Chad. How would I go about figuring out the ROI, the return on investment of automating my warehouse? Good question.
Yeah, definitely. A great question. So how we typically go about it at Bricz, we first tour the facility. We don't know what we don't know, and we need to understand the processes, the flows, and the business. Then we start gathering data from the client, whether it's just data, raw data, or requirements. So what their objectives are from a business perspective, operational perspectives, and so on. Then when we look at the data, we're looking at the headcounts, wages, throughput, anything related to the operation and that functional area that they're specifically looking at, or where we identify as areas for improvement. We're making sure to collect all that data and consolidate it for an RFP, which then, once we start looking at different solutions, we're able to send that to the vendors to basically get their throughputs back, as well as any type of proposals that they can put in front of us that can help us identify what the total cost of ownership would be. And then we can say, okay, based on your proposal, we have these efficiency gains, this TCO, and then any other relevant metrics. And then we can look at other, depending on the timeline that we have, you could look at other metrics like tax benefits or utilities, carbon footprint, like we discussed earlier. And then we compare it to, say, 10-year roadmap and see when the ROI would be recognized and what that ROI would be. So there's a lot of data that goes into this, a lot of analyses, but in the end, I mean, that pretty much sums up how we go about getting that or figuring out that ROI for automating a warehouse.
Well, Steve, what do you tell your potential customers over at Locus if they're asking, again, these shiny new robots look wonderful, but when are they going to deliver their ROI? How do you tell them to figure that out, and how fast can they start realizing those benefits?
Well, we take this very seriously. We work very closely with our prospective customers and mutually explore what those savings are. We have a very defined process. We have tools that assist with that to help us dig in. And certainly labor is the biggest component, but there's many other components of savings that we either remind them of and help them quantify what the benefit is. We've seen, paybacks as little as 2 months, and it's typically in the, 6 to 12 month range. So, very, very impressive quick returns that they can expect with our solution.
So this questioner says, for those companies that are not yet there for robotic implementation, sorry, Steve, what technologies do you see as the best for performing the fulfillment, like pick and put function in the warehouse? Maybe V could address that first.
Sure. So there's many different options. And I think the first thing is to understand what your goals are. Is your goal to condense your storage? So you need, a solution that's going to have condensed storage. Is it to optimize picking and you've got the space for it? So if it is to optimize picking, then, do you have the space for a conveyor system? So more traditional automation that's going to help you pick more efficiently. Or do you want to minimize disruption and go more the AMR route, like a Locus robot, where you can implement it right away with minimal disruption to your warehouse? So it's really understanding first what your goal is. Then based on what that goal is, there are many different automation providers. And I'd start by checking, what will cause the least disruption in your warehouse, and then kind of working backwards from there. Because however much you can minimize the disruption, the easier it will be for you to implement that automation system.
Chad, can you address that as well?
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of what V said, because all great points, all depends on what your goal is. And you can find very short lead time solutions for picking, put away, like a goods to person or just a point-to-point AMR solution, kind of like Locus. But then you can also have other solutions that are a little bit more in-depth, or bringing in multiple different solutions. So an AMR with a robotic arm picking to a tote, we see that pretty often. So it's a very broad question, but also a very great question, because you really need to pinpoint what exactly you're looking for in your automation solution to be able to choose the right one, because it's not a one size fits all, and automation isn't a silver bullet. It's always going to be based on your business and your operations.
This questioner says, how can we make an automation project simpler and faster? Who wants to take that? Maybe V, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, so that's a great question. No easy answer. But, select the right vendors that you want to work with that are going to help enable that growth. So you want to pick vendors that have experience working with different automation systems, and that the WMS can integrate easily with. That the WMS has generic interfaces that to control those automations. Because as soon as you get into any sort of custom work, either with the automation provider or the WMS, that's going to add to your timeline. So you want to make sure you're getting generic stuff that you can plug and play right away.
Thanks. This questioner says, what are some hidden costs that are not discussed during the proposal and design phase? How dare they imply that such a thing ever happens? I don't know who wants to take that burning question. Maybe Chad over there can start, and we can see if the others have any insights into that.
Yeah, I mean, so from the Bricz perspective, we work with so many different vendors all the time that we kind of pick up on some of the key questions to ask to identify any sort of different fees or costs that are associated with implementing an automation solution. That being said, we're not the vendor, so we can't know exactly what else is there, but we can at least try to weed out all of the top ones that we see or the ones we've seen as trends or patterns with particular vendors in the past.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if it's also sometimes a question of the potential buyer themselves not understanding what the full costs are. It's not like the seller has some sneaky costs they're going to give you that they didn't tell you about. It's that you yourself as a potential buyer did not properly prepare in terms of finding the right vendor to do this for you, asking the right questions. Steve, I wonder if you had guidance on that, on what kind of questions should your potential customers be asking you to make sure that there are no hidden costs in the purchase or acquisition of a robotic fleet.
Yeah, Bob, we try to preempt those questions and we be as transparent as possible. So first of all, our pricing model is very simple. It's a robots as a service. It's one flat fee per robot per month. There is a one-time implementation fee, and we try to be all in on that implementation fee. Our philosophy is no surprises, and there really are no hidden costs, if you will, with the Locus solution, at least.
Another question I think I'll direct to Steve. This questioner says, to the naked eye, it seems like different robots, kind of do the same thing in different packaging. So what are some of the key differentiators and features to look for when comparing, for example, different AMRs?
Yeah, I remember like Modex many years ago when the robotics section was just a few providers off in a corner, and now you walk through Modex and every other booth has a robot in it. So very good question, and they do all seem to appear to do the same thing. So some of the things that you want to look for is is the provider, do they have a proven solution? So do they have a track record of success? We have a philosophy at Locus that seeing is believing. So I definitely, not only just a demo, but I would encourage anybody to, if you're considering automation, to see that automation in action and see if you can actually visit a site that's actually deploying that automation. That's one option. How adaptable is the solution? Is it flexible? Does it scale? For example, with Locus, you can add robots incrementally or flex up and down, like we talked about earlier. And then finally, is the provider, have they been there, done that, so to speak? For example, Locus has our roots in automation. We were actually born out of a 3PL, so we understand. Warehouse operations and fulfillment is in our DNA. So those are just a few of the things that you should look for.
Thank you. I hate to say it, I'm the bearer of bad news on this one, but we are just about out of time. So we're going to have time for one final question, and I'm going to direct it to V. So V, putting in automation, especially fixed automation, such as automated storage or conveyors, might have kind of a sense of permanency to it. However, we do need to remember that supply chains are fluid and evolve over time. How can we ensure operational agility alongside any type of warehouse automation?
Yeah, so with many different warehouse automations, you are going to be bolting things to the ground. So it is going to be hard to change that. It's going to be fixed in place. But I can promise you that your business will not stay the same. Your business is going to change. And It's normally easy to think that your software, it's not tangible and it's going to be easier to change than what's physically in your warehouse. But that's not necessarily true. In my experience running warehouses and using different WMSs, I'd use software at times that seemed more fixed and rigid than the racking that was bolted down in my warehouse. So you want to make sure as you're picking your software partners that the software is powerful enough to give you the agility that you need. It's got tools like low code development options within the platform, so you can do modifications and customizations easily. That it's a modern SaaS platform where you're getting access to the latest features and patches, and the modifications and customizations that you're doing are not really preventing you from upgrading easily. So as your business is changing, really look into which vendors will give you that platform with the flexibility that you're going to need as you grow.
Thank you so much, V, for that. And thanks to all of you, Steve and Chad, as well, for that fantastic discussion. There are two kind of underlying themes going on here, obviously. Number one is that automation is going to be a must for just about every warehouse facility. Not necessarily exactly the same kind of automation, but something that fits the needs of those particular facilities. So thank you very much for bringing that to the table, as well as the need to study the idea of automation in brownfield facilities. Because we do, again, as we said at the top of the show, the luxury of greenfield is simply not going to be there for most companies. So thank you, gentlemen, for that. And thank you, audience, also for your fantastic questions. I really appreciate that. If you need to connect with Tecsys, here is a QR code that takes you to more information about Tecsys's warehouse automation series. If you don't have time to take a shot of that right now or copy down that URL, don't worry. This information will be sent to all attendees of this webinar. So once again, I thank our great panel of speakers today, and I thank our audience as well. Everybody, have a great day.